Imagine this scenario. An American boxer finds himself trapped in one of the toughest prisons of Russia. Horrified by the inhumane conditions of the prison, he realizes that the only way out is to participate in the brutal fights organized by the Russian mafia. However, the boxer soon finds out that his inmate opponent is much stronger than he expected. The story takes place in Russia. George Chambers, former heavyweight boxing champion known as the Iceman, records a humiliating vodka commercial, speaking in broken Russian. The Russians are unhappy with his pronunciation, so George loses his temper and breaks the vodka bottle. His manager, Phil Gold, tries to calm him down, reminding George that he is broke and he needs this badly. In St. Petersburg, a young boy walks into a nightclub. He delivers burgers to a notorious Russian mobster known as Gaga. Gaga and his men take bets on illegal fights going on in prisons. Meanwhile, in a remote Russian maximum security prison, Chornya Cholmy, Yuri Boyka, a brutal inmate and a skilled martial artist, gets ready for an upcoming fight. It's worth mentioning that Boyka is played by Scott Adkins, a British actor known for his martial arts movies, and he did an incredible job playing this character. It's very believable, both the acting and his amazing martial arts skills. Local guards work with the mob, allowing and organizing the fights. Both guards and prisoners cheerfully greet Boyka, who makes an impressive entrance, and his opponent from a different Siberian prison. The match is being televised and broadcast in Gaga's nightclub. The two fighters get face-to-face and the fight begins. The opponent does a series of hits, and so does Boyka. Boyka skillfully avoids his kick and knocks the opponent to the ground with his own flying kick. He gets up and counterattacks, but Boyka kicks him again, putting him on the ground. In the next round, they go back and forth, grabbing and hitting each other, until Boyka kicks the opponent to the ground again. But he still gets up, so Boyka picks him up and throws him down to the ground, after which he viciously beats him up. But even after that, the stubborn opponent still refuses to lay down, so Boyka reluctantly kicks him down to the ground again, ending the fight. The prisoners chant Boyka's name. He is the winner. After the fight, Kirill, Boyka's trainer, informs him that soon he will meet an opponent worthy of his abilities. Funny thing in this scene, Kirill tells Boyka that when he gets out, he's going to be the richest man in Kiev. Are the creators of this movie aware that Kiev, or rather Kiev, is in Ukraine, not Russia? I would forgive this in a movie made in the 90s, but this is from 2006. Anyway, in Gaga's club, rich Russians celebrate Boyka's victory. They made a lot of money betting on him. Gaga isn't happy about it. Boyka never lost a fight, so Gaga starts losing money as people only bet on him and no one else. But Gaga already has a plan in motion to correct it. George takes a cab and drives to the hotel. Before he arrives, a group of criminals break into his hotel room and put drugs inside his Bible, intending to frame George. The champion arrives at the hotel. Phil is annoyed that he's an hour late for a dinner with his Russian sponsors, but George couldn't care less and goes back to his hotel room. One of the criminals hastily signals the others to leave George's room fast, but it's too late, so they attack George, knocking him unconscious, and leave the room. Sometime later, George wakes up surrounded by police. Apparently, nobody has seen the men that broke into George's room, and there are no security cameras, so when the policemen find drugs hidden in his Bible, George is arrested for the possession of drugs. Because of George's status as a world-known celebrity, the press immediately covers these events as Gaga happily watches the report on TV. George is put into a police transport that drives him to prison through the snowy Russian scenery. As the police transport delivers George to the gates of Chornya Cholmy prison, prison warden Markov personally comes down to observe George's arrival. By the way, guys, I have to point out that the correct name of this prison is
Черные холмы,
which means Black Hills, not Chornya Cholmy. Even though it is spelt like Chornya Cholmy in the movie, a more appropriate spelling in English would be like this, Chornya Holmy. Despite his reputation as a tough fighter, Boyka enjoys collecting stamps. Kirill informs him about George's arrival. The prison guards take George out of the car. He is confused about what to expect. The local prisoners curiously approach the fence to take a look at the new unusual prisoner, annoying George. They quickly disperse, making way for Boyka, who approaches the fence and aggressively stares at George, who stares back at him with condescension. Once inside the prison, George is taken to Markov's office. He pleasantly informs George that he's a big fan of his, and would like him to participate in the fights going on in this prison. But George is still confident he will be getting out of prison soon, as he is innocent of the crime he was convicted on. George is given prison clothes. He then refuses to take a shower because the water is ice cold. The guards don't take kindly to his attitude, so they try to attack him, but George easily beats them up one by one. The officer calls for backup, so, being outnumbered, George reluctantly takes a freezing cold shower as they watch him. George is escorted through the prison as inmates make fun of him. One of them throws his urine in George's face, saying it's a gift from Boyka. George grabs the inmate's scarf and starts choking him, but reluctantly lets him go, threatened by the guards. In his new cell, George gets acquainted with his roommate, Stephen Parker, a British addict imprisoned for possession of drugs. In the morning, the prisoners are awakened by the loud alarm. George defiantly refuses to get up, so Stephen explains to him that if he doesn't, they will just lock the cell again, and he will spend the entire day inside. In the mess hall, the local inmates curiously stare at George when he comes in. He goes to get some food. The prisoners are being fed a disgusting-looking, barely edible soup. While eating, George and Stephen get to know each other. Suddenly, the prisoners start standing up. It's Boyka and his friends. They're highly regarded by the inmates in this prison. George refuses to stand up, so one of Boyka's men approaches him and tries to intimidate him. George quickly knocks him down. As the security guards go inside, getting ready to stop the fight, George confidently approaches Boyka and starts insulting him, after which he throws his drink on Boyka's face. Tired of his attitude, Boyka attacks George. The guards quickly take them away from each other. Boyka is enraged that the guards didn't let him deal with George, but Markov explains to him that he will have a chance to do that in the ring. Meanwhile, Phil informs George that it doesn't look very good. He may be in this prison for a long time. George tells him to appeal the verdict and get the best lawyers on the job. Gaga has a meeting with Markov. He pays the warden to make sure that George fights Boyka, hoping to make a lot of money on this fight. In the prison yard, a group of inmates bully Stephen. George interferes and helps the British man. Enraged by this, the prisoners try to attack George, but he quickly beats them up one by one, putting them on the ground. The rest of the inmates walk away from George, afraid to stand in his way. Stephen thanks George for his help and informs him that both the prisoners and the guards take orders from Gaga, a powerful Russian mobster who runs the illegal mixed martial arts matches dominated by Boyka. Despite being a tough criminal, Boyka often prays in the chapel. When he leaves the chapel, the men who attacked George earlier tell Boyka what happened. Enraged by George's undermining his authority, Boyka tries to attack him again, but the guards rush to stop them. Sometime later, Boyka prepares for another fight. This time, George sits in the audience and closely watches Boyka as he skillfully deflects his opponent's attacks and puts him on the ground many times. After winning the match, Boyka points a finger at George, daring him to go into the ring. Gaga is getting tired of losing money because of people betting on Boyka, so he rushes Markov to force George to face Boyka in the ring. Guards go into George's cell and try to escort him to Markov's office. He refuses and attacks the guards, so the entire security force drags him to the basement, where Markov tries to coerce George to fight Boyka by implying he might get an early parole and be released out of prison if he does. When George refuses again, Markov humiliates him by ordering George to move sewage with a shovel. Threatened by the guards, he reluctantly agrees and starts working in the sewer with the old, crippled prisoner, Krot. It's a nickname. It means a mole. Krot is quite strong for his age and manages to pull himself upwards with a rope mechanism, which impresses George. Stephen informs George that Krot used to be a commander in the Russian army many years ago. He advises George to take Markov's offer and fight Boyka. It is revealed that Boyka's men coerce Stephen with drugs to spy on George and talk him into fighting Boyka. They go into the sewer and try to intimidate him themselves, but George beats them up with Krot's help. For the latest incident, guards put George in the hole, which is a metal cage submerged in the freezing cold, rat-infested sewage water. Cold and afraid, George is getting desperate. Krot brings him food and some pills for his fever. He advises George to accept reality and let go of the ridiculous fantasy of using lawyers to get out of this place. Eventually, Markov orders George released from the cage. He is escorted to a fancy dinner table for a meeting with Gaga, who personally came to the prison to have a talk with George. Gaga reveals to him that he is the one that framed him. Furthermore, Phil Gold has been working with Gaga all along. He never intended to help George get out of prison. This enrages George. Having no other option, he reluctantly agrees to a match with Boyka. Both start preparing for the upcoming fight. Stephen helps George to practice. The match won't be easy for George because he is a boxer, while the fights they have here are mixed martial arts matches in which extremely agile and fast Boyka has a definite advantage, being really good with his kicks. The preparations for the fight are underway. Despite George being the expected winner, Gaga tells his men to call his guy in London and put $500,000 on Boyka. All because Boyka's men in the prison have a way to meddle with the fight. Stephen, a desperate addict, who will do anything they want for the drugs they provide to him. Before the fight, inmates cheerfully greet Boyka, the beloved local champion, and angrily yell at George. Boyka says he can defeat George in his own game, just with his fists. The bell rings and the fight begins. Boyka attacks, but George avoids the attack and delivers a series of heavy blows. Meanwhile, Stephen, coerced by Gaga's men, changes George's water bottle with the one that has a light sedative put in it. Krot witnessed the dirty move, but kept his silence. The fight goes well for George. Boyka misses again and again, and George successfully counterattacks and puts him in the corner, after which he viciously beats him up, putting him on the ground. George confidently walks away, expecting him to stay down, but Boyka defiantly gets up and the fight continues. Humiliated by the knockout, Boyka changes his mind about the fist thing. Boyka easily puts George in the corner, grabs him and keeps kicking him, after which he puts him on the ground. George gets up and tries to attack Boyka, but his kicks are too strong for George to handle. Eventually, they both fall out of the ring, ending the round. After the first round has concluded, George takes a sip out of the tampered water bottle. Boyka is quite angry that the round was stopped before he could knock George out. The second round begins. Boyka starts with a few energetic kicks, only to witness George starting to lose consciousness from the sedative that was put in his water. Confused about what's happening, Boyka nevertheless knocks George to the ground with his flying kick. Unable to stand up, George passes out. Having made a lot of money betting on Boyka, Gaga celebrates in his club. George wakes up in the hospital, greeted by Krot. The two immediately deduce that George was drugged by Stephen, so George goes to confront him, only to find out that Stephen took his own life out of guilt. Enraged about the drugging that made him lose the fight, George goes to confront Boyka about it. Embarrassed in front of other prisoners, Boyka seems genuinely surprised to learn about the drugging. It appears Gaga never bothered to tell him about his arrangements. Markov interferes, stopping the two men from fighting again. George reminds him about the promise he made earlier when he said George would be released if he fights Boyka, but Markov coldly denies that the conversation even took place. Feeling betrayed, George punches Markov. The guards take George away as Boyka observes the strange ordeal in confusion. As a punishment for assaulting the warden, the guards take George into a freezing cold prison yard and chain him to a pole following Markov's orders. They brutally punish him with clubs. Boyka is very angry with his men for drugging George during the fight without his knowledge. He goes as far as assaulting them for interfering with the fight he wanted to win fairly. In the yard, lightly dressed George isn't expected to survive long in the tough Russian winter. Back in St. Petersburg, Phil Gold rushes Gaga to give him the payment for delivering George to them. Gaga happily gives him the money, but unsurprisingly has Phil eliminated before he can depart with the money. Meanwhile, George makes it to the night, barely alive in the freezing cold. In the morning, a few prisoners try to help him. One of the prisoners kindly gives George his clothes, wrapping them around him, and lets him drink some alcohol to keep warm. Other prisoners donate some clothes and food as well. When guards find out about it, they sound the alarm. Markov assembles all prisoners in the yard and demands those responsible for helping George to identify themselves. One of the prisoners from earlier steps forward. Seeing this, the entire group follows him, unwilling to let him get punished for his act of generosity. Unimpressed with their act of camaraderie, Markov orders the guards to keep the entire group out here in the cold as punishment. By the way, guys, I have to point out that throughout this entire movie, none of the Russians was actually speaking Russian, with a few exceptions of minor characters in the beginning. I mean, Russian prisoners speak to each other in English, Markov addresses the prisoners in English. Even Gaga and his men talk to each other in English and watch the televised matches commented in English. I realize that this is done for the convenience of the viewer, who wouldn't want to read subtitles, so they're actually talking to each other in Russian, we just hear it as English. But then they have characters like George who speak in actual English, and some Russian characters seem to understand them, while others don't. This is very disorienting. Anyway, Gaga's limousine arrives at the prison. The mobster is furious about Markov's idiotic decision to endanger George's life with the pole punishment, as he needs the boxer alive to participate in more fights. He has a meeting with George and admits he had him drugged in the last fight, but Gaga assures him that despite of what happened, he intends to honor the deal they made earlier. If George wins the next fight with Boyka, he's a free man. Initially reluctant, George agrees to Gaga's terms, but he asks him a favor. Repaying the kindness that Russian prisoners showed to him during the pole punishment, George has Gaga deliver warm jackets for all the inmates of this prison. Impressed with George's selfless act, Krot offers to help him win the fight. Despite his present condition, Krot was once a highly skilled soldier, trained to fight with nothing but his bare fists, so he has a very good understanding of martial arts. Realizing that he can't beat Boyka with his usual boxing technique, George accepts Krot's offer and starts learning mixed martial arts from him. Krot reveals to George that when he was still in the military, he found out that his younger brother was stealing from the army. The brother had a wife and a daughter, so Krot reluctantly took the blame for the crime. When he ended up in this prison, the guards tortured him, so he tried to escape many times. In one of the attempts, he took the life of one of the guards but was shot himself, so he ended up being paralyzed and doing a life sentence. Krot reveals that his real name is Nikolai. The two create a powerful bond as Nikolai tries to pass his age-defined wisdom to George. Both Boyka and George train hard for the upcoming fight. Finally, the time is near. Gaga arrives to observe the fight personally. The two go into the arena as half the prisoners are chanting Chambers, George's name, and the rest support Boyka. Boyka immediately notices that George has been trained by the old man to move his legs differently. The fight begins. George skillfully avoids Boyka's kicks and does impressive kicks of his own, putting Boyka in the corner and then on the ground. As the two strangle each other on the ground, the bell rings. The round is over. It is apparent to all viewers that, because of the training George got from Nikolai, the two fighters are now evenly matched in their technique. In the next round, Boyka aggressively attacks George. They go back and forth, kicking and grabbing each other. George ends up on the ground as Boyka pulls his leg. He sets himself free right before the round ends. Motivated by Nikolai, who reminds George that his only way out of this hellhole is to win, he does much better in the next round, successfully deflecting the famous flying kick Boyka loves to use so much and beating him again and again. He eventually gets Boyka on the ground and grabs his leg. Remembering what Nikolai taught him earlier, George manages to break Boyka's leg. George is the winner, the new undisputed champion of the prison. Nikolai nods to George, being proud of him. After the fight, Gaga congratulates George on his victory. He kept his word and had George released. Furthermore, he gives George a substantial amount of money, his cut from all the money Gaga made in the two fights. In an unexpected twist, George takes the money and gives it to Markov in order to arrange Nikolai's release out of prison. Being accustomed to the life inside the prison, Nikolai gets scared of what his life would be like now. But George assures him that he will be all right and takes Nikolai to the train station to meet with his estranged niece in a heartbreaking reunion. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.